Hello, this is going to be a quick run through of changes that are coming in 0.3 that will affect the Bloodbarrier Warbringer build. Starting off with the core mechanics and passive tree, blocking is no longer limited to strikes and projectiles by default. All hits that are not specifically unblockable with the red flash can be blocked. Basically what this means is all hits, regardless of source, can be blocked, provided it's not a boss attack with a red flash and the audio cue. This is an overall buff to block for everyone. Not much else to say about that. Player, minion, and monster base maximum block chance is now 50%, previously 75%. 33% nerf. This also means less damage from Lay Siege and Offensive Stance, though this is mostly mitigated for this build by Turtle Charm. Lay Siege and Offensive Stance are nodes that give 1% increased damage per 1% chance to block. I think this change is hideously bad. I think 33% is way more than it needed to be cut off if they wanted to make block stronger. Because I think 50% chance to block or not block is just shit, basically. Especially if we don't get any like nodes for max block, and we only have the current sources we have to increase max block, like the anvil or shield corruptions. I think this is just overall going to feel worse for builds that rely on things like armor and block. The Giant's Blood Keystone passive skill now halves the amount of life granted by strength. Substantial nerf, no longer worth using the Hammer of Faith or a two-handed mace for 2 sockets. The Giant's Blood Keystone is this one that gives you can wield two-handed axes, maces, and swords in one hand. Already had the downside of triple attribute requirements of martial weapons, and now it also has the extra added downside of losing 50% of the life you gain from strength. I think this nerf is hideously bad, and I don't know why they keep doing these kind of nerfs to the warrior side of the tree. I have so many complaints about this, but I'm not going to get into this video. Because of this, it's no longer worth using the Hammer of Faith. Just go for a one-handed mace. You'll get the same stats that you would get from a rare two-handed mace, especially with some of the changes that are coming to items, or with exceptional items specifically. The Glancing Blows Keystone passive skill now provides chance to evade is unlucky and chance to deflect is lucky, and no longer provides block chances doubled, or you take 50% of damage from blocked hits. This can't be used to cap block early. You will struggle to hit the default 50% max block cap before your first ascendancy point, but using parry to apply Bloodbarrier's Corrupted Blood should be significantly more consistent now with the changes to block. I don't know if you still have to be within the 1 meter radius to block to parry projectiles. It didn't look like it in the reveal, but we'll see. It also looked like you don't get any heavy stun build-up from active block and parry, but again, this is never mentioned anywhere in the patch notes, and they never said it in the reveal, so it could have just been to stop them from getting stunned while they're trying to showcase it. I don't know. The Glancing Blows was a keystone that this one down here, you can basically path down here quickly or early on to Lay Siege, and then all the way down here to grab Glancing Blows and parry in motion. This would give you 75% block chance, because this would give you double block chance and then take 50% damage from blocked hits. This would mean that you would get 75% chance to block, which would give you 75% increased damage for Corrupted Blood, which is a big boost because you don't get a lot of damage early on. And because Bloodbarrier's Corrupted Blood scales from life, you don't have a lot of life early on to scale it either, so this was pretty good. Now you're going to only be able to get 50%, and you're going to struggle to hit that 50% early anyway. Added 15 new clusters to the warrior area of the passive tree. No idea what these will be, though we do know that at least some will be. X% of armor also applies to elemental damage, similar to the Black Parade mod. I'm hoping we get some max life nodes, or at least some interesting ones, I guess. Because right now, a lot of the passive tree, maybe not a lot of it, but some of the passive tree nodes are pretty boring, and kind of just, you would never use them. So hopefully we get some good changes here. I know they added around 150 to the passive tree, so we'll see there. Onto item changes, the Bloodbarrier unique shield now has 10 to 15% increased block chance from 20 to 30%. This doesn't affect the build due to Renly's training. This nerf is kinda dumb. They did it to a lot of unique shields and also to rare shields. For things like Bloodbarrier specifically, lower level shields, 10 to 15% increased block chance is a difference of 1 to 2% base block, as opposed to like 5 to 6% base block. This nerf basically makes it completely pointless to even have the mod there at all. They would be just as well just not, because it really doesn't make a difference. Or at least it makes a very minor difference in very specific situations. The Black Braid unique body armor now has 100 to 150% of armor, also applies to elemental damage, previously 100%. This can roll over 180% with a lucky corruption. I think 183 is like literal max. Because before this mod was Boolean, it was just true or false again. It was originally just armor applies to elemental damage, so an unscalable value. Now that it has a scalable value, it means it should be rollable with corruption values, which is like, I think it's like 22% one way or the other. On the point of Giant's Blood and two-handed maces and stuff like that, exceptional item bases will be added. These can either drop with 30% quality or 1 extra socket. This means we can use an exceptional one-handed mace to get 2 sockets with potential for 3 with corruption. These, I believe, only drop in endgame, but your weapon really doesn't matter too much leveling up. So long as you can get some strength on your weapon, and then maybe like a strength rune or 2, you're not gonna be losing much over having more sockets, especially early on. The runes for strength and kind of just coming into like, it's all you can get on your weapon slot for these for this build specifically, unless we get an interesting unique from the ones that are added in the next patch. I'll come to this point about Defiance of Destiny in a second, but first we'll cover the Ascendancy, because it's kind of important to look at Turtle Charm as a notable first. The Great Wolf's Howl notable passive skill has been removed, and the Warcaller's Bellow notable now also provides Ignore Warcry cooldowns. This combines your previous 3rd and 4th Ascendancy into one node, which gives you an extra point to throw into something instead of. The Renly's Training notable passive skill now grants gain 35% base chance to block from equipped shield instead of the shield's value, previously 40%. This is a 5% base block chance nerf. This doesn't really affect you too much overall. Early on, definitely. Later on, not so much. This is what I would consider a pretty fair nerf, all things considered. Unlike the Turtle Charm change, which I don't like. The Turtle Charm notable passive skill no longer grants 25% less block chance or can block damage from all hits while shield is not raised. Instead, it now provides you take 30% of damage from blocked hits, and maximum block chance is 75%. Wording in Path of Exile suggests that this is Boolean, again an unmodifiable number, true or false, but we can't be totally sure until we can test it in game. If it works how I think, this is a loss of around about 8% max block chance with my current setup of items, making the Anvil amulet significantly worse for this build. If this is true, it's worth looking at Defiance of Destiny as a replacement once you can afford it. On that point, if the 75% maximum block chance from Turtle Charm does end up being Boolean, the Defiance of Destiny amulet may be worth using over the Anvil. Defiance of Destiny gives 6 to 10% increased maximum life, 10 to 20 strength, and gives some mana regeneration that doesn't affect us, and recover 10 to 20% of missing life before being hit by an enemy. This would help mitigate that you take 30% of damage from blocked hits line from Turtle Charm. So basically the way this works is, whenever you are hit by an enemy, before the damage is applied to your character, you will recover 10 to 20%, depending on the roll on the amulet, of your missing life before the damage is applied. So if you take a hit from like a smaller enemy that doesn't deal a lot of damage, or spells and attacks that hit often but don't hit for a lot per hit, you will basically heal from these skills instead of taking damage. Things like Jamin-Ra's lightning beam thing, and Doriani's shit. Some of the spells and attacks in the Doriani fight also do lots of tiny hits instead of one big hit. And with those, you'll basically recover X% of your missing life before that damage is calculated, and these things basically just become a way to heal, as opposed to a way to take damage. Back onto the Ascendancies. Because We now have a free ascendancy slot, or ascendancy point, rather. We have some options. Stacks of Jade granted by the Jade Heritage notable passive skill are no longer lost when taking physical damage from a hit. This makes Jade Heritage a potential choice for 4th Ascendancy node, which gives access to the Encased in Jade skill. This lets you generate a stack of Jade every second, up to a maximum of 10. Each one gives 1% physical damage reduction, which is not specific to hits. Using Encased in Jade consumes all stacks and gives guard equal to 6% of maximum life per stack, consumed for around about 5 seconds. I think it's like 4.9 specifically. You can't gain Jade while you have guard, however. So basically, the 1% physical damage reduction is just generic physical damage. Any physical damage you take, be it from hits, or corrupted blood, or bleed, it's applied. And guard only affects damage from hits. So this can be good to mitigate big hits that you're not too sure, or if you're like worried about not being able to block it, or so on and so forth. You can kind of hit this as an oh shit button to guard for up to 60% of your max life. I think you get an extra 1% from quality, so 70% of your max life as guard can be good for mitigating big hits. But again, you can't gain Jade while you have guard. So while your guard is active, you're not generating passive stacks of Jade. So there is that. With Great Will's Howl and Warcaller's Bellow being combined, and Seismic Cry's Stun being nerfed, which I'll get into in a second, it may be worth using Anvil's Weight as your 4th Ascendancy for more consistent armor break to generate stacks for scavenged plating. Now, Anvil's Weight is this keystone here, which gives break armor equal to 10% of hit damage dealt. Now, this is not specific to physical damage, this is just any damage you deal will break for 10% of the damage dealt. So on that, skills. Magma Barrier has got some changes. This is a 30 Spirit Gem. Now passively increases your chance to block while active. Over time it charges up with lava. When fully charged, your next block with your shield raised will spray lava in front of you and grant you an endurance charge. Now grants 25% increased block chance, and quality provides an extra up to 5% increased block chance. Overall 30% increased chance to block. At 20% quality, which is more than you get from 4 perfectly rolled jewels. I would probably swap this for Overwhelming Presence, depending on how it actually plays once we get to test some of the changes. Seismic Cry has some pretty bad changes that I don't like. Cooldowns no longer reset if it doesn't empower attacks. Now heavy stuns enemies that are primed for stun, and empowers attacks if it heavy stuns a target, as well as if it hits a heavy stunned target. It no longer has 200% increased knockback cooldown, it no longer has 400% more stun buildup, and it no longer has hits ignore enemy monster physical damage reduction. Now allows you to expend an endurance charge to bypass the cooldown. Quality now provides empowered attack aftershocks deal up to 10% more damage, previously up to 40% increased Warcry speed. This means you can no longer use the pin support to prevent it going on cooldown before you get Warcaller's Bellow. Much less knockback and stun build-up, meaning armor break with Devastate support will be harder. All Warcry speed is gone from the skill, but this isn't too bad. Originally, Seismic Cry had 40, I think it was like up to 46% Warcry speed on the skill itself through levels, and then it also had 40% Warcry speed through quality. In patch 0.2, they removed the per level Warcry speed, and then now in 0.3 they're removing the quality. Though, with the way that this build works, it doesn't really matter too much how often you can Warcry. But with the changes to like the knockback distance and the stun build and stuff like that, it may or may not be worth using the gloves that we're currently using for reversing knockback. But again, we'll have to see how much worse it actually is. This also means that you can't use Seismic Cry on other ascendancies that don't have Warcaller's Bellow with pin support, which you can really do for a lot of builds anyway. It was kind of useless for a lot of builds anyway, but now you definitely can't do it at all. Scavenge Plating now has 4% more armor per Scavenge Plating at all levels. Previously 3 to 5% at gem levels 4 to 20. Quality now provides Scavenge Plating duration is up to 2 seconds. Previously up to 2% more armor per Scavenged Plating. 40% more armor at max stacks instead of 70% at 20% quality. It's a fairly big loss, but better base duration, so potentially better uptime on higher stacks, at least in situations where you may not be able to generate stacks as consistently. Some new gems that were added that might be worth looking at. Fortifying Cry. Perform a war cry that grants guard and causes subsequent shield attacks to release an empowered shockwave when dealing damage. This skill's cooldown can be bypassed by expending an energy charge, an endurance charge even. New skill gems, potentially worth adding into the build, and we'd have to see the gem numbers first. Guard from the skill would stop you from generating stacks of Jade later if you decide to use Jade Heritage over Anvil's Weight. Iron Ward, a new spirit gem being added. Not sure what the spirit cost is. While active, stores a percentage of the physical damage that is prevented by your armor or other sources of damage reduction. Using this skill releases the stored damage as a nova of spikes. This could help with armor breakthrough Anvil's Weight, depending on the spirit cost and damage numbers, but again, we'd have to see the actual gem stats before considering whether or not it's actually worth taking. And you would also, if you wanted to add it in, you would have to figure out what you wanted to do to either get extra spirit or get your current spirit reservation down. So, kind of on that, that's kind of the basis, the gist rather, of it, all the changes that are worth mentioning when it comes to this build. Overall, there's some good changes. Some of the changes I think are really bad. I don't think they are good. On an unrelated rant about the patch notes, the reveal looked great. The patch notes, not so great. There's so many... going through the patch notes, especially the updates that they released recently, like last night or today, it just feels like nerfs on nerfs for some reason. I don't really know why. And again, like I mentioned it in one of the other videos, the Flame Blast nerf from 0.2, I still do not understand it, and the fact that they didn't run it back at all in this patch makes no sense. The skill is basically unusable, it's basically dead, and it was never run back in this patch, and I do not understand why. For all the good changes in the reveal and all the cool, like all the quality of life and all the stuff that's coming that's really awesome, there's so much stuff that some of it just feels like a complete side grade. Things that just makes some stuff just feel clunkier for some reason. I don't know why. This aversion to Flicker Strike being usable and sustainable without having to use another skill, still forcing people into using combos that people should be rewarded for using combos, not forced into using combos. If I want to use a single skill, I should be able to use a single skill. But these are personal grievances that I know that other people share, but that's besides the point. There's definitely still some really cool stuff going forward. I'll be hopefully coming up with some more interesting builds in this league, especially once we see what some of the new uniques are. I'll be doing some unarmed stuff with the Hollow Palm keystone and the new Black Flame Covenant keystone that converts fire damage to chaos and ignite damage to chaos. Probably should see if I can come up with some interesting stuff for that. I have an idea for Stormweaver and the new keystone that makes Arcane Surge apply to life regeneration instead of mana regeneration. With Stormweaver, with Stormweaver, it's like you have Arcane Surge, and then Force of Will. Force of Will is getting changed to be X% increased effect or increased Arcane Surge magnitude per 10% missing mana. So the idea would be to take that and then take the keystone that makes your Arcane Surge apply to life regeneration instead of mana regeneration. Take Mind Over Matter so that all damage you take dumps your mana first, so you're constantly at 0% mana or as close to, which would give you the maximum effect of the changed node of Force of Will. And I think the numbers are something like 60% more life regeneration. It might be shit. It depends on how much actual life regeneration you can get to make the mod worth using, or to make the keystone worth using. So we'll see on that. And again, some weird build ideas with unarmed because it's not monk specific. So we'll see if there's any interesting shit that comes out of that. But that will be about it for this video. I apologise for the ramble at the end. And hopefully the next time you see a video from me, it'll be an interesting build. Goodbye.